Therapists of Reddit, what's the worst mental health advice you've seen a movie or TV therapist give? Therapist here. It isn't advice, but when they portray a psychiatrist doing therapy, that's not what the majority of people will get from their psychiatrist, and it causes messed up expectations. Advice-wise, it's bad when they force someone to own up to something or confront something. The client has to be ready for that and choose it for themselves after rather hard work has been done to make sure they are ready. Also, any portrayal where they are meeting or interacting outside of a session. Also, the whole "my client said they are going to harm someone, I'm going to intercept them myself." I am a trauma therapist. They like to use therapy sessions as a form of exposition in the aftermath of trauma. So inevitably, the therapist is saying, if you want to heal, you have to tell the story in as much detail as possible. Well, retelling the story like that is re-traumatizing. So either people avoid therapy after trauma because they don't want to do that, or they come in and insist that they just need to tell the story in excruciating detail and then leave flooded and triggered saying therapy doesn't work. It isn't the telling of the story that heals. It's how we hold and treat the story that matters. Therapist here. For me, it is when movies portray therapy as something that happens quickly. Like 5 to 6 sessions and you're cured or better. Also, how some therapists are really quick to send a client to the hospital. And all of the ethic issues. Especially when you see therapists discuss their clients with friends or when they have sex with a client. Clinical psych here. What annoys me is the portrayal of us as a bit unhinged ourselves, not impossible but not to that degree. And the portrayal of the work as airy-fairy, talking about emotions or providing outdated or esoteric interpretation. When in fact it's a scientifically rigorous process. We use psychometric measures and clinical interviews to assess and diagnose, and an evidence-based approach to formulate a treatment plan with specific techniques to address physical, psychological, social, cognitive, and affective contributors to the problem. Edit. Got on a rant and didn't answer the question. Advice to confront an abuser. This can go horribly badly if not done very carefully and with a lot of support and planning. Not a movie, real life. My friend shared their suicidal thoughts and the motherfucker started going off about reincarnation. Some therapist they turned out to be. I'm in a clinic with many suicidal persons, thoughts and attempts. One day, my roommate was called to the doc, not the therapist, who started asking him why he hadn't killed himself yet and that suicidal thoughts are very normal and he just would have to learn to live with them. This was more than 2 weeks ago. We're still raging on this doc. So many people who aren't therapists replying. Anyways, as a therapist, what annoys me about media portrayals of therapy is that we just sit and listen. That's not therapy. And constantly agreeing with your client is also not therapy. Also, that we give advice. The only advice I give is suggestions for coping skills or DBT skills, how to use cognitive restructuring, etc. I don't actually give advice because that's not my place. Not a therapist, but my mom is. She says that most therapists portrayed in TV violate tons of rules and it annoys her to no end. And she's never seen a good therapist on TV ever, apparently. Getting romantically involved with a patient. I'm looking at you, Kevin. Sherbutsky was your patient. The movie 50-50 where she sleeps with her client. That's a big no-no, crime time. Also, it's hard to portray in movies just how long the process therapy can take for people, and there are a lot of ethical things that occur that advance the plot of a movie but shouldn't happen in the real world. I've been in therapy for a few years now for PTSD. Because of the inaccurate timeline portrayal in the media, I was disheartened at first. But you can't just flip a switch and fix some things. It took me nearly 20 years and multiple combat deployments to get where I'm at. I can't stand Dr. Phil. His approach is a type of bullying. Yelling at parents and clients because their behavior isn't acceptable and in front of hundreds of people. Yikes. Literally rebranding public humiliation as psychology. Not advice per se, but I hate when the media portrays people with chronic mental illness, psychosis, bipolar disorder, as violent. A small percentage can be. I know a schizophrenic dude. He's a fucking oddball, that's for sure, but he's a pretty alright dude. I wouldn't hang out with him on the daily, but he isn't anywhere near what is usually portrayed in movies, etc. Not a therapist. I've been chronically suicidal for years. One night at university, I was having a terrible attack. It sounds too frivolous to call it an episode, so I called the university police, who then by standard practice connect me to whichever university psychologist was on call. I'm not joking, this woman said. Yeah, I know who you are. Your name has come up in counseling center meetings before, and you really need to get over yourself. I have a daughter with a disability who has it way worse than you, so really, you have no reason to be so depressed. How this woman was a licensed, employed psychologist is beyond me. But I quit relying on other people when I become suicidal. I'd rather suffer alone and take the chance I'll die than ever face this shit again. Therapist here. I remember there was this one episode of some teeny bopper show where a character would black out a lot and wake up random places. The therapist determined he was repressing trauma but released him from treatment until he was ready to talk about it. Huge safety no-no. While I agree a client needs to process trauma on their own terms, if they're in frequent dissociative states and at that highest safety risk, they need to be continuing treatment throughout. Different note, I'm also trained in EMDR and appreciated seeing its portrayal in Grey's Anatomy. I also loved that the therapist was no nonsense and willing to call out BS. It's important to be real with our clients. I'm an addictions therapist and there is so much BS in the intervention shows that I stopped watching because it made me so angry. Also shows like 13 Reasons Why can go straight to hell. Also an addictions therapist. Absolutely loathe intervention. I also have clients who show up to group and recommend the show to other clients because of how helpful it is. How about we don't? I know this isn't about a therapist, but I really hate when media portrays someone with a mental illness as someone who wears dark clothing, piercings, listens to heavy metal, wears dark makeup and has a hairstyle that isn't normal by society's standards. We look like your mother, father, sister, brother, and even your neighbor. Not all of us do those things, we literally are just everyday people who happen to have a mental illness. Read in agony and newspaper column. Letter was from a teenage girl writing about her mother, and her description was basically a textbook case of a mentally and physically abusive person. Stuff like constantly feeling like you are walking on eggshells, shouting and yelling at the slightest misstep, constant belittling remarks, etc. The advice was for her and the rest of the family to be more considerate of the mother because she obviously works very hard, and maybe the daughter should look at her own actions to see if she's causing such behavior.
Make sure to like and subscribe for more stories.